You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seat belts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
In the beginning, when he was young, I thought, well, a young man. It's good for him to tramp around, take a lot of different jobs, but it's more than 10 years now, and he has yet to make $35 a week. Why am I quoting Death of a Salesman? Because this week, we're looking at the death of an LGS. Mm-hmm. Basically, now that things are, not great, and Wizards seems to be doing everything it can to destroy the LGS, how do you know when to call it quits? How do you know when to close the doors, turn the lights off, play closing time for the last time, and close the doors?
Let me done with it.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, to me, this is kind of interesting because my experience is only from, and I want to say the positive side of things. A lot of people think that when you close down shop, it's negative. But it doesn't always have to be negative. But that is kind of how we are framing this week. There are positive ways to close the shop. Anecdotally, I have a lot of those stories. So we'll try and keep it light, and I'm kind of interested to see from the other side of things how this kind of goes down.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you talk about closing an LGS, obviously a lot of people see it as bad because, either you're closing your doors to the community or there just wasn't enough business, you weren't doing things appropriately, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is, though, that there's a few factors that go into when to close.
Okay.
Obviously, the big one that everyone knows about is cash flow. Mm-hmm. If your cash flow is bad, maybe you should look at closing. Mm-hmm. If you're struggling to make ends meet as far as your allocation and stuff goes, obviously, if you're struggling with payroll, that's an issue.
Yeah.
That's also, I've found, and maybe it's similar in your case, more often than not, that's the first place that people go to save money to try to stay open. And what usually happens is the owner, if they are collecting a check, stops collecting a check. And they say, you know what, I've got to take care of my staff. I'm going to stop drawing a check for the time being so I can pay rent, so I can pay my distros, so I can pay my employees, so I can pay my utilities.
Yeah.
And cash flow is very, very important for that. One of the other things that I think, and this kind of leads more into the positive direction, is do you feel like you've kind of run your course with it? There's nothing wrong. We did an episode a little bit ago about, do we ever see ourselves leaving the industry and what would that look like? Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with you deciding, you know what, I just can't be that involved. I've known plenty of people that have closed, so to speak, and what they do is just sell the business to somebody else, and then it just moves somewhere that's closer to the new ownership. And it's not bad. It's literally just, hey, I've run my course in the industry.
Yes.
I'm not really feeling fulfilled by it anymore. And it's almost, as someone who's owned a shop and been involved, if I don't feel invested in my community, out of fairness to them, because the community deserves an owner of a store who is invested, who wants to make them happy. It's almost like you owe it to your players to get out, or at least find someone to step in that is passionate about the community, that is going to take care of that is going to say, you know what, I think that Weiss Schwartz is the dumbest game in the world, but my community loves it, and I love my community.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do it.
Yep.
And I think that's been something that's played out time and again, not just locally, but people I know that have had stores in other areas, is it's, look, I've gotten everything I can out of this. I've given everything I can, and I'm just moving on.
Yep.
Done.
Yeah. Anecdotally, I've seen almost every aspect of what you talked about occur, but it never led to a full LGS shutdown. What happened in one example was the shedding of an entire vertical.
Okay. Yeah.
And the payroll that came with that allowed them to refactor the business and continue to operate at profit, and eventually bring other people on to better serve the new verticals that are better serving their community. And so it worked out for them at the expense of one employee and a small aspect of their business overall. Much maligned at the time, but in the interim, other businesses have come in to offer that same vertical. And while that has created a little bit of ire and a fracture in the player base, overall it turned out to be pretty good because it allows multiple LGSs in the area to survive at kind of an equal footing. I have seen somebody run their course in the industry. They and their business partner sold their entire LGS. They were not asked to sign a non-compete, so 6 months to a year later, they reopened with the shop that they wanted to, which is much more of a pop culture style shop. And when that hit a threshold, I believe either one or both sold out again. And now one is doing what they want, which is being a road warrior. They are independent in the industry, but they get to travel, which is really what they wanted to. So they stepped away successfully from two businesses to find what they wanted to do, which was really no longer serve a community or a group of people, but rather sate a desire in their own lives. I don't know if their business partner still maintains the pop culture shop or not, but that was that story. The closing of an LGS, like I said, is not really something that I have been able to experience, but I have seen it. There was a shop here that started as primarily an eBay business, decided to open a physical shop, always seemed like it was on the verge of closing, but primarily did its business online. It just wanted to give it locals another place to shop. And then during COVID, when they could no longer hold events and the large company that was next door went remote and they lost foot traffic, they decided to quietly close and return to their online business because there was no community to serve. And if the community needed to be served, another LGS had popped up that could serve that community. And so for me, this has never really been that impactful.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is this used to be a much bigger issue years ago when you had maybe one or two LGSs in your town and that was it.
Yes.
I don't think that's really, been a thing as much because there's so many LGSs out there now because there's so many people involved that it makes it a lot easier to say, hey, you know what? I can just go to this other place. It's not the worst thing in the world. I'll just go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And I think that's been something that you've kind of seen pop up is now with the prevalence of LGSs everywhere, it does two things. One, it makes it a lot easier for your players because they have choices.
Yes.
Two, it does make it a lot harder for an LGS because there's way more competition, which lends itself to the first type of closure I talked about, which was basically your cash flow's not there. And I think, timing is very important for that, right? If I open a store in August of 2020, probably not open anymore.
Oh, yeah. That's when we were finalizing a contract and looking to
That's right.
modify the space because it was there for a spa, so it had a weird sink. So I can't remember that detail, but yeah, we were almost under contract for the space, getting ready to sign the paperwork necessary to get contractors in, and then COVID struck a couple months later, and luckily that kind of pulled the rug out from underneath us in a very convenient way because we'd only dropped the money for the business license and everything needed to move forward, so it was only a couple $100. And we look back on it and we think of that as kind of a saving grace because only one person would have been able to pull a salary at the time, so that would have been one person at the shop.
Yep.
And this is going to be on a college campus. So even though we expected money to be flowing in, even at the beginning, only one person would have been able to draw a salary.
Yeah.
That was just the expectation, and that puts a lot of stress on one person to just kind of get things up and running.
And that's one of the issues that leads to the, I'm going to stop taking pay now because if someone realizes, man, I can't do this alone, I have to bring someone else on. Most people, as the owner, would be like, you know what, man, I got to cut my pay because I can't not have this person working 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
But I can put in 40 hours a week, and as long as I have enough to live, I can just not pay for the rest and just that'll, stay in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the other things is, knowing your player base is very important for this, because if you can let there anecdotally, there was a store here in St. Louis that's been around for 25, 30 years at this point.
Yep.
They hit the point where, due to cash flow, they realized, hey, we're probably going to have to close. And they let their community know, because their community, again, had there's literal parents who grew up going there as kids who now go there with their kids to play games. And they told everyone in the community, hey, we're going to do a bash, like a tournament weekend, where this is going to be our farewell. And in doing so, the community rallied around them, and now 3 years later, they're still open and thriving now.
Nice.
So you actually can, there are ways to tell, does my community care? Do I owe it to my community to care?
Yeah.
And that's been something that I think, there's a few people I know that either owned stores like that or went to stores where they said, you know what, look, this place was so important to me, I don't want it to go away.
Yep.
Because there's people that it can continue to be important to. And I think you touched on something important when you talked about the store that just got out of an entire vertical. That's something, you don't necessarily need to close up shop if you're not making ends meet. It doesn't just mean it's time to go. You can look at restructuring the business.
Mm-hmm.
What verticals do we want to get out of? If we get out of a certain vertical, does that mean there's less employees? What does that look like? Do we want to shift hours? And there's all these things you can do to exhaust before it's finally time to say, you know what, we got to go. And I think there's no, unfortunately, catch-all for it. There's no, I can't pay rent, I need to close. I mean, that's probably a good sign that something's not working.
Yeah.
It just may not be, hey, let's close up straight up. It can be as simple as, you know what, let's take a look at some other stuff instead.
Yeah.
If you're open till 3 a.m., are you really getting enough people after 10 o'clock to make it worth it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can look at shedding employees or moving the one employee that you might leave around into a judge position or what have you. So, you offer more for that time, but you also get to maintain presence in the store and continue selling with a reduced staff, etc. And this is not a fast process to go from open to close. This is something that you can see and sense and kind of watch come down the pike, so to speak. Then because it does give you time to shift verticals, to move things around, to see what does and doesn't work, pull your customer base, your player base, what have you, to see if there's anything that you can do to make this happen. And then when it's time to go, it's basically just like liquidation city, everything from the floor to the rafters.
Yeah. When Moonbase closed, we literally, even the monitors, computers, the shelving units, everything.
Yeah.
It was, hey, let's get rid of it to get as much money as possible, and then split it and call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, we sort of, we let everyone know a couple months ahead of time, hey guys, this is going to be our last day of operation, just to give people time to look for another job.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was, well, it's going to take us about a month to get all of this stuff torn down and out of here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do that. And that's, that's where a lot of the time came from.
Okay.
Was getting everything torn down, sold, etc. We were probably in the space another month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah.
Literally just trying to get all of that stuff gone.
Yep.
Because some of it, was board games, Magic inventory, computers, and the stuff like Magic inventory. Obviously, there's a fast out for that.
Yes.
There's buy lists. There's no buy list for gaming monitors.
Or your fixtures.
Or, especially fixtures. There's no, buy list for a custom made display counter for cards or a booth. And then, something every LGS has struggled with is those 6 to 8 foot glass display cases. Where do you post those to get rid of them? There's not a quick and easy way outside of like Craigslist or Marketplace, because it's not like you can go to another store and say, hey, I see you have all of your displays set up. Would you like some more that you don't have space for?
You've got to hope there's another business looking to open up to come and pick up your cases. Again, anecdotally, when we were looking to open up, one of the things we were paying attention to was jewelry stores in the area, because the display cases are generally pretty similar. And as you begin to look at display cases, they're essentially like echelons, and the upper echelons have safes and security built in, so you don't have to walk your stuff back to the main safe. You can put it essentially underneath the case.
Yep. In a time lock safe,
what have you, yeah,
as part of the fixture.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And, first thing to look out for was any jewelry stores in the area that were looking to move fixtures for one reason or another. And similarly, when you're looking for hardware, table chairs, etc., restaurant style distros often have tables and chairs that satisfy like WPN requirements usually. And so that's a cheaper way to go in, but to get out, like, what are you gonna do? You're not Pizza Hut in the 90s selling themed tchotchkes, like a lamp.
Man, I miss those arcade machines. And I think, another thing is when you do that and you realize it's time to close, let's get rid of some of this. Are there vendors you've worked with in the past? And that's one of those important things about building relationships is, hey, this is a local store that we've done some deals with. We've run some tournaments together. Maybe reach out to them and see if, one, they know anyone, or two, they want some of this stuff. Because that is, one of the most stressful parts about closing. Not that closing isn't bad enough, but, I closed my business because in some way it, failed, or I moved on or whatever, so there's a sense of loss, but also now I have all this shit staring at me and I have to get rid of it. So having those relationships is very, very good. Because it turns out shipping those displays is a nightmare. Don't do it. Imagine.
One of the things I'm curious to know about, you mentioned like the going out bash, is when you're timing this, you're timing the step back. You have to let your players know. Your community can continue to filter in, but if you're going to downsize or right size, leave the industry, what have you, your players will go play somewhere else. And my expectation is that as a good business owner, you will let them know ahead of time, and essentially end your events. With foreknowledge.
And usually like a month or two ahead of time is, good. That I've seen people do is about a month ahead of time. They'll let people know, hey, this is what we're, will be, our last day is this day. We'll be running XYZ event. What usually happens is your players will probably start to go somewhere else before that last day. But they will absolutely be back the last day. And the reason they're going to go somewhere else is like, look, I can't spend my store credit if you're closed. So why would I play here and earn store credit? Or whatever. So I think you'll see that. But the good ones do. They come back for the last day. They come back to say bye, not just to their friends and the staff, but to the space. But I think, like you said, having that foreknowledge is important because you can't just drop it on them 3 days ahead of time. People may be out of town or whatever, something, but giving them enough lead time to have a good send-off for the community as well as the store itself, I think is really, really important. Once you do decide it is time. And again, it's something that you may, if cash flow is the issue, you may not be able to have good prize support. But anything you can do for the community is better than nothing. Because, at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong here, you don't open an LGS to make money because you're going to make shit. You open it because you love it. And because you love the community and you love the industry. And if
you want to offer something.
Yeah, you want to offer something, and sometimes it's hard to say, you know what, this love and this passion wasn't enough.
Yeah.
The business failed somewhere along the way,
Mm-hmm.
be it through mismanagement or what seems to be the case increasingly is literally just the increasing cost of stuff, competing and having to compete with the manufacturer in the space makes it very difficult for stores to survive.
Mm-hmm. The reach for any vendor, not any vendor, but any LGS in the U.S. can be the U.S. North America extends. You can access Canada if you really want to ship, and vice versa. And so you're competing against everybody all the time. And we saw it with TCG Player and CFB Marketplace. They were going tete-a-tete with sales to compete for dollars, essentially, for customer wallets. And that's the same thing with every LGS that's online right now. You're competing against all of them. And generally speaking, somebody out there is running a sale. Right now, I think there's a sale on... People have basically been... I don't want to say fire selling, but like putting the Warhammer 40k collector decks, the $500 thing, on sale at a deep enough discount that it makes you question the $500 quote MSRP that we saw on Amazon at release. And it's not just one LGS, it's like a cycle. Every time somebody's sale ends, another person picks up. And so that's what you would be competing against as an LGS trying to sell this product, is every other LGS is doing this. So it makes it difficult for you to attempt to work just locally when nationally you could be getting blown out by other LGSs and the OEM.
Yeah.
Via Amazon. And that is an extremely toxic environment to attempt to work in. It's impressive that people still support sealed at the LGS level when you can buy it so cheaply elsewhere instead of just singles, but people that like coming down to the LGS, that enjoy the LGS, that want to support the LGS, are the ones that you said will come back on the last day. They're the people that you can count on. They are your comic subscriptions, essentially. But you have to be aware of that. You can't just be stagnant. We've talked about this a number of times recently. That is kind of setting yourself up for failure if you remain stagnant and unwilling to compete. But at the same time, competing shrinks your profit margin because everybody else is searching for the same razor-thin margin.
Yeah.
With national reach, because why not condense everything down into the eBay marketplace?
Why not? And it is getting increasingly difficult, especially if you want to make money on sealed product. It almost seems like you need to be in the Walmart margin model, where you're just doing insane volume and making 3 to 4%.
Yeah.
That's just not a good spot for an LGS, I feel like. Maybe that's wrong. But
if your locals either have deep pockets or you have enough locals to buy that sealed, or you're willing to compete online for those margins, absolutely.
Yeah.
Competing online for a sealed product seems like a fool's errand right now, but that is what it is. Like Baldur's Gate sealed is starting to dry up. That is becoming increasingly expensive, despite the EV on the set being all in on Ancient Copper Dragon and like 5 other cards.
Yep.
Like, trying to resell that is... I mean, now it might be profitable as it dries up and you can move it for more, but at the time you were competing against everybody else to bargain bin sell it. Star City right now is selling Streets of New Capenna at $80 a box, which is roughly... It's $10 less than they were selling it. That's a sale.
Yeah.
But it's about 10% over the EV on the set.
Horrible.
Yeah. Like, that's not a margin you can rely on as an LGS if you're just saddled with these boxes. You can't compete with Star City, who's going to make that Walmart margin when you need to start at 10% just to make your overhead back on what you spent and the employees to essentially bring it into your system and then ship it. Very, very difficult. as far as the life cycle goes on the way out, you're closing down shop. Do you just kind of let your sellable inventory churn in store as people kind of straggle in? Like this week is X% off, next week is Y%, or would you look to kind of fire sale as much as you could to either another LGS or what you mentioned, a buy list?
So I think there's a couple ways you can do it, and I think one of the important things is what are you more concerned with?
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean, are you more concerned with, am I taking care of my community, or are you more concerned with, I am alleviating some of the impending debt? And I think that's important. And there's no right answer all around. For example, with Moonbase, there was one guy that had like 4 figures in store credit. He was literally the first person we told, because we said, hey, look, this is going to be a thing. You have the most store credit, which you earned not from one event, but from playing like every event.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure you're taken care of. So come on up, spend your store credit. This is what the discount is going to be. We're going to go public with it on Saturday. If you can come in before then, we'll get you taken care of.
Yep.
And that was, an in-store, because the debt wasn't the concern. It was making sure we took care of the community.
Mm-hmm.
If it's, look, I need to get money. Do you need the money quick? Because then it's buy list. Or you need the maximum amount of money, because then it's in-store / TCG turn.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think that's really where that distinction comes in, is you have to decide which of these is actually important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Is it more important to take care of the community, or is it more important for me to basically cover my ass?
Yep.
And make sure that money is there.
Yeah.
When people come to collect.
Okay.
So
that makes sense. The experience that I have with an inventory sale is from the vendor perspective, where we bought out another vendor, and that deal took months because logistics were involved. We bought out a vendor that was looking to exit the industry. They were in the Southwest, the American Southwest, and on the buy, it was over $1 million. Like, that's what we paid. Not too much over, but somewhere a little over north of $1 million. And we had to pallet ship back all of the singles inventory, and it took months to go through it and inventory it and put it into the system. And it wasn't like piddly inventory. It was stuff like Chinese 5th Ed with the symbol.
Oh, Chinese 5th Ed is the best.
So we had like the Dark Writs and stuff. I can't remember if Brainstorms were in, but like
Brainstorms were, because I had a playset in my pauper deck that got stolen.
Yeah, so it wasn't just chintzy stuff. Like, there was stuff that had to be like inventoried properly, and it took months and months and months to do the deal, and then after that, months and months and months for us to inventory it. But they were still dragging their feet on exiting the industry. They made their deal on the Magic vertical, but the others were still waiting. And at that point in time, it kind of was the question was, all right, are you actually getting out, or are you just kind of looking to change verticals like we mentioned up top? Eventually they did exit, but they had no initial debt they needed to pay down. So they could just take their time, drag it out, cut down verticals as necessary, shrink the business over time, and continue to make things profitable, which I think is a little more of a unique situation and generally lends itself to the vendor side of things in the LGS. It's hard to kind of cut away verticals and still maintain profitability because you got to rent your space.
Yeah.
That
is very true.
Yeah. So anything else that you can think of for this kind of process? Like, there were some flagship markers we talked about up top to let you know, like, hey, you're on your way out.
Yeah. Not really anything else I can think of now.
Okay. You ready for picks then?
Let's do it.
All right. I think you went first last time, right?
I did, yes.
All right, so I'll go first this time. So I'm going with Nautiloid Ship, a card I've only been watching for a couple of weeks, but a card that I like a lot in regards to picks right now and its placement within the Commander format. So when we look at it on stocks, it's just a rope. And you might look at it and go, well, why are we going to look at this card that has a market of $3.20 when the market has been $3.20 for the better part of 3 months? And Card Kingdom was buying 35 at $2. Because quietly, Card Kingdom is now buying 43 at $3. Littlest now as of recording. It's about $2.50. Credits at $3.25. Okay. Well, what about what's going on in TCG Player? Well, when we look at TCG Player, there's immediate arbitrage opportunity if you can buy at quantity, and there will be in the next coming weeks. It's like, okay, so we're looking at a card that has a very narrow delta between buy list price and current market price. So we can either flip immediately for profit, trade for profit, or hold for the long term, and we'll cover. Now, as far as Commander is concerned, this is eminently playable in every deck. It's like Relic of Progenitus. It's a very low effort way to control a singular graveyard. Though this does get better if you can crew it, I don't see that as a reason to not include this in any deck that wants to deal with graveyards. It's also, I think, an above rate vehicle for those themed decks, making it an easy inclusion. Now, Nautiloid Ship, I forgot to mention up top, 4 mana for a 5/5 artifact vehicle with flying. When it ETBs, you exile target player's graveyard, crew 3. But the trigger that I mentioned is when it deals combat damage to a player, you may put a creature card exiled with Nautiloid Ship onto the battlefield under your control. So you just kind of upcycle what was coming from the graveyard. Now, as far as the format is concerned in a microcosm, I don't think this is S-tier anti-graveyard tech. It doesn't belong, when you're looking at the package, it doesn't belong up there, but I believe it is a fairly high option on the tier list. I'd say somewhere in the B range. And it's notably better against Reanimator than Spellslinger, because you can bring back their creatures. You can't bring back their spells. And it's not to say it's bad against Spellslinger. There's just an obvious benefit to targeting the creature Reanimator player versus the Spellslinger or Spell Reanimator, however you want to look at a player. If you're playing against Kess, not the greatest target. Now, the mana value of this compared to other options makes it a bit difficult to include. Again, it's 4 compared to 1 or 0, which is what I believe pushes it down that tier list. But I think it's the most playable anti-graveyard card, regardless of what the makeup of your commander pod is. Compared to Tormod's Crypt, Relic of Progenitus, Bojuka Bog et al., this is a bit mopey. But in a non-CEDH pod, this card is going to be a house at all stages of the game. Deployment later in a game can be better, as your opportunity to trigger the on-combat damage to player clause to deploy a game-winning threat is much higher. So, really good from turn 4 onward. Being an artifact makes it incredibly valuable as part of that anti-graveyard package, and as far as vehicles are concerned, this is also incredibly impactful at all stages because it does something really unique compared to a lot of other vehicles in the reanimation process. And 4 mana for a 5/5 vehicle with flying and crew 3 seems ahead of the curve to me, and I think it's the trigger that really makes it dangerous as a vehicle. And we're basically looking at agnostic demand, and that's what sparks my interest. A lot of my picks from a while ago just applied to a number of themes. They weren't just pigeonholed, and that's what I like about this. It's an artifact like Relic and Tormod's Crypt, but it does a little bit more than those, and it allows you to play a different or unique game. And the reason I didn't talk about any given strategy to employ this in is because it doesn't belong to any one strategy. Relic doesn't belong to any one strategy, but Bojuka Bog, similarly. They don't belong to the strategy. They just are foundational to the format. Now, as far as the timeline is concerned, I expect within the next 3 months, we'll be able to outlist to buy list for cash profit, though immediately there is the opportunity for profit and credit, like I mentioned. And this moves on average about 320 copies a month, and there is about 3 months of supply left if sales velocity keeps up. And I do believe that's going to happen, as while we have moved on from Baldur's Gate, it's recent enough that the new Commander product, 40K, containing recursion themes will continue to spark interest in this card as a counter comp. So what I mean by that is people have forgotten about Baldur's Gate because it's already 16 sets old. But now we have 40K with reanimation themes, so people are going to look at the cards they just opened in the calendar year 2022 and see, what can I do here? They'll find this card. Bing, bang, boom, here you go. Now, it is within the 40K deck, Necron Dynasties, commanded by Sazarek, the Silent King, that I believe is going to push interest because of a land that was in the list, Tomb of something or other.
Yeah.
Right, that's the card that people are going to look at, that have been looking at, that is going to renew interest, push interest in this a little more, because now we're going to see in the face, Commander players are going to see in their face a reason to play Nautiloid Ship. Now, like, well, I don't know if my group has reanimation elements. No, here you go. They're handing you a land that's going to reanimate things. And Tomb Fortress, that's it. So simply put, WotC gave us a solution, Nautiloid vehicle, to a problem, Tomb Fortress, we didn't know we were going to have. Like 6 months ago, whenever the set came out, right? So it was a solution without a problem. As far as reprint equity is concerned, I could see this being reprinted in like a Matrix Universes Beyond as a Sentinel, especially based on the look. But I can't imagine this appearing anywhere else as is, because the Nautiloid is part of Baldur's Gate 3. Like the game itself, the Nautiloid belongs to that. So I'm pretty sure this is close to a 0% reprint chance as is. They really can't reference Nautiloid Ship anywhere else, so I don't know how they would do this. By quantity, I've got a couple of these from cracking product and playing drafts. Not too many, but I'd be happy throwing another $40 at this to have a few more playsets to trade from, setting aside 6 to 8 to sell the buy list later. Because when I wrote this up, like I said, CK was buying them at $3 a piece, and I see that price rising again in short order once people get these Warhammer decks.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things we've seen lately with products over really just the last year about, within a year, they have forecasted solutions a couple of times now. I think Nautiloid Ship is just, it fits such a good battle cruiser mentality. I mean, it literally is a battle cruiser for one.
Yeah.
And for two, it's very efficient to crew, it's color agnostic, it goes in everything, and provides a way for any deck to interact with a graveyard in a way it may not be able to, you know?
Yeah.
And obviously Relic, Crypt, all that does too, but this one also gives you a clock and a way to reanimate.
Yes.
Which I think is huge upside. I actually bought 10 of the borderless while you were literally just explaining why the card was good, because I realized I don't have any yet.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, one of the big draws to this is not only how battlecruiser it is, but like you touched on, the reprint equity on this is so low.
Yeah.
That I don't know when we're going to get it outside of Baldur's Gate or a Secret Lair. But unless they're doing like a D&D Secret Lair, I don't really think they'd do it. And if they did that, I feel like they'd probably do stuff like Minsk and Drizzt and stuff like that. That's way more iconic for Dungeons and Dragons than the Nautiloid Ship, which didn't exist until Baldur's Gate 3. And I guess they kind of touched on it in Spelljammer that just released, but I really don't think there's any reason they would go to the Nautiloid Ship in a Secret Lair.
Yeah. They want to do interesting things with the vehicles. We just got Unlicensed Hearse, which is the constructed solution to graveyard problems, and this is the Commander solution to graveyard problems. For what it's worth, the population in Commander is criminally low, and I think it's just a matter of time before either decks get submitted with this card and so more people see it, or like I said, there's that rush to binders after people sit down and either look at their 40k decks and say, okay, I need X, Y, and Z to upgrade my deck, or they play in pod and they realize that Tomb Fortress is a very real card. They're going to see it outside of that deck, and they need a decent solution, and they're going to pour back through their binders. I think recency bias in this case is actually going to serve us pretty well, and once it begins to kick off, you know, sales velo is decent, I think it'll uptick, and then we'll just kind of take off to the moon. Like right now, it is like super, super, super mopey on rec, and basically only goes with like Baldur's Gate generals and then some vehicle hoo-ha that I think is quite unimpressive right now, but it's just a matter of time. Truly. You, on the other hand, are pantsless.
Yeah, speaking of color agnostic ways to deal with things colors may not have access to, we are going for Karn Liberated, so named because he is Magic's most well-known nudist. So, last week I picked Scapeshift because Scapeshift does a very good job of preying on the Omnath decks. I expect once some more modern events happen, you'll see Scapeshift start to overtake the meta. You know what does a really good job of killing Scapeshift? Tron. Tron loves Karn Liberated. I love Karn Liberated in EDH, where if you check a EDH rec, it's in 1% of decks, which is insane. This card is a way to deal with any problem permanent type that you don't have access to. One of the other interesting things about this is if you look in the stock graph, this is literally the lowest price this card has had since 2013. Almost literally 10 years ago for the new Phyrexia version. That is absurd. And we're just coming off of the Double Masters. Well, I guess it was the original Double Masters was the last reprint. The one that had the original art and then the Teeden art that looks, no offense,
very
Mark,
confused.
Kind of ridiculous. Yeah, he's very confused. I don't think we'll get this reprinted in Brothers War.
It's in the list for this set, so I don't think so. For DMU, it was added to the list. I don't think we're going to get it in.
Yeah, I don't think we'll get it after that. And as we've seen, the list generally is not enough quantity to actually impact the price of the card.
Yeah.
It's just not. Timeline-wise, that's where it gets a little bit interesting because it kind of depends on what happens in 2023 with organized play. We know we kind of have a Pro Tour, we kind of have Nats, whatever you want to call it. But we don't know what organized play is going to look like after that. Now, if for some reason we find out we're getting modern events, I think this card explodes back up to the customary $30 to $45 price point. Now, the interesting thing about this price as well is as recently as May last year, its current low would have been buy list. When it was $30, $35, $20 was buy list for it all day. Looking at the price chart, it seems like the price dips, and then usually within 6 months to a year, we go back up. Well, we've been on a steady downtrend since about this time last year, but without organized play, I think it stays steady. So I'd be expecting a turnaround of about nine-ish months on this. So it is a little bit longer. Now, quantity-wise, I mean, it's $20. So really, you could go for the EDH set. Most of the Tron lists I know now are running about 2 to 3 because there's other Planeswalker options, obviously. So, you know what? Maybe you only need 6 to 8. Either way, I think that worst case scenario, if this is something you trade out, it's very unlikely you lose money at this point. This card is a way to answer everything in EDH.
Yeah.
And I think that this may be a case of, because frankly, the representation on EDH Rec does not back up even a $20 price point for as often as this card has been printed, for as few events as are happening now in Tron, or in paper. But somehow, this price has maintained. To me, that says this may actually be a card carried by the Invisibles. Because I don't know where else the demand is coming from. Unless there's a ton of Karn decks that are out there that just aren't registered on EDH Rec, which obviously could be the case.
Yeah.
But you'd think that out of 1.5 million decks, more than 10,000 would have it in there. But right now, we're at an all-time low for a card that has massive utility, has a massive tournament pedigree, and has an established archetype that probably isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So I think this is very, very good to invest in for the mid to long term, being in that 6 to 9 month window.
Yep. The three things I want to bring up are: one, you need this to play Karn Tribal in Commander, absolutely. Two is that I think Karn Lib, much like Patriarch's Bidding, when I discussed that, is removed from EDH rec because of the price point it carried, which will bring me to my third point. But that is going to kind of relate as to why this is low pop on rec. People just could not afford this. Didn't want to spend the between $50 and $100, almost $100 that this one Planeswalker was. So they just didn't. And now that it's more palatable, it's easier to find with the list printing. People are opening it in DMU. Yes, we might see this pick up. Now, the last point I want to make in regards to prices, when we take a look at stocks, every time it peaks is when Tron either won a GP or did very well at a Pro Tour. Almost every single one of these I can call out distinctly. The only one I do not remember is right between Rivals of Ixalan and Dominaria United. Or not United, just Dominaria. Whatever happened in there, what event that was. So we can essentially predict that the next event that Tron does well at, essentially, we're just going to be a regionals or maybe a Pro Tour. That is what is going to help push this up. Not just demand from people who are now able to buy in, because this is a very reasonable card to buy into, but also demand from Modern, because like you said, when Scapeshift pops up, Tron is a very good hammer for that nail. Similarly, when mid-range decks take over the format that are green-based, you can't Thoughtseize the top of the deck. Tron is a very good option for that. When Omnath disappears, Tron is a very good option for that. It loses to fast combo and can lose to burn a lot. Outside of that, Tron is definitely a natural predator for a part of the Modern format that just got pushed out right now.
Yep.
And once we see Modern settle back into something a little more similar to what we are used to in regards to archetype, we should see Tron break through. It's still on the fringes, people still play it, so yeah, there's probably very light demand for it, but not the kind of demand that brings us the peaks that we see on the stocks graph. As far as timeline is concerned, I would think it would be, if we find out that the third Pro Tour of 2023 is Modern, like we were talking about a while ago, I would expect a lot of the cards that have just sunk in Modern to get pushed back up in preparation for whatever could happen in the format, because the last thing people want to do is be on their heels, especially if they're going to be backpacking or just playing the finance game with the Modern format.
Exactly.
So we'll see some float there. And then as results pour in and people people treat Magic like it's 2006 again and buy into a new deck, after every result set, we will see people pick up Karn Libs, and that'll continue the float and push this back up. But that would be my expectation, is whenever that Pro Tour is announced.
Yeah.
That would be my
That's
timeline.
about what I'd expect it as well.
Yeah. And quantity, I think, again, spot on. If you have the opportunity to throw 200 at it, probably not a bad place to store that for the time being if you want to wait on that. If you want to go a little wider, you mentioned very accurately that the constructed playset is 2 or 3 right now.
Yep.
It all depends on, regardless of what colors you're playing in Tron, what your Planeswalker suite is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're leaning more Eldrazi than traditional. But that would still put you either at 0 or max 3. So if you were to pick up 4 or 5, that gives you the opportunity to trade out the 4th and the 5th. And that it might also be reasonable. You could pick it up from an X-Tron player.
Yeah.
They'll have their copies ready to go.
They will. They're done.
Yeah. I know I am with Tron. I love the deck dearly. I have my Japanese Chronicles lands
Yeah.
that people hate, but I'm off that. I'm on that scape shit bullshit right now.
Yeah. The deck that Tron preys on.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get to play all the best parts of Amulet without having to also solve a Rubik's Cube.
That's fair. That's definitely a huge positive.
I play lands and you lose. It's an easy strategy. It's very easy for my tiny brain.
That's fair.
I believe that is going to wrap it up for us this week, unless there's anything more you want to talk about. All right.
We're good.
So, for at MtG Cabalcast, which you can find on Patreon, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, I am at Halt, I am Reptar. You are?
At Thirsty Sizzler.
I will see you next week.